Good morning.
This morning, I want to start with the man who's probably turning out to be one of the top, if not the chief witness for the prosecution in this case, former Vice President Mike Pence. He's taken issue with your contention that President Trump was simply asking him to pause the certification. Let's take a look.
American people deserve to know that President Trump and his advisors didn't just ask me to pause. They asked me to reject votes, return votes, essentially to overturn the election.
What's your response?
Yeah. Mike Pence will be one of our best witnesses at trial. I read his book very carefully. And if he testifies consistent with his book, then President Trump will be acquitted for these reasons. Number one, Mr. Pence recognizes that John Eastman, who was giving legal advice, was a renowned legal scholar. Number two, Vice President Pence recognized that there were discrepancies and fraud in connection with the election. He wanted it to be debated on Capitol Hill. Mr. Trump wanted it to be debated in the state legislatures. But make no mistake about it, based on what Vice President Pence will say, the government will never be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump had corrupt or criminal intent. And that's what this case is about.
Well, what Mike Pence has said all this week is that what President Trump did was wrong, and he knew it was wrong, and he was pressing him to do something that was wrong. It was also pretty clear.
He never said it was criminal.
He said it was wrong.
Never said it was criminal. There may be difference. You may think that somebody is acting inappropriately under constitutional principles, but Mr. Pence, who's a lawyer, never said to Mr. Trump, I think what you're doing is criminal, and that's very important. One of the things that you've been there is in White House meetings, a lot of options are on the table or discussed. The ultimate option that Mr. Trump asked for, President Trump asked for at the Ellipse speech, was merely to pause the voting for a period of time to allow the state legislatures to weigh in.
For many days before that, he was insisting that they would reject the votes. He was making it very clear to Mr. Pence that he wanted them rejected. You're right that he eventually went to the Ellipse and said, let's pause the votes. Now, even that, though, you talk about Mr. Eastman, even that Mr. Eastman said was a violation of the law. So he didn't know that he was breaking the law.
No, he didn't say that.
He actually did say that. He wrote it as a minor violation of the law.
He said that the Electoral Count Act was unconstitutional, and the only thing that's required under the Electoral Count Act is a vote on January 6th, with Mr. Eastman said, which is very important.
That it was a violation.
No, but you have to let me finish. You have to let me finish.
Yeah, but I'm just responding to something.
Because what Mr. Eastman said is that the Constitution is superior to any statute, and it trumps the Electoral Count Act. What he was saying is that ultimately the right of the state legislatures under the Constitution exists to weigh in on this issue, to recertify or audit. So what Mr. Eastman was saying, and Mr. Trump is not a lawyer, let's understand that. He's a political leader and a businessman. What Mr. Eastman was saying as an attorney is that there's a constitutional pathway to making this ask. And one thing that Mr. Trump did, he only asked. You're allowed to petition your government for redress of grievances. A president is even allowed to petition his vice president. That has never been criminalized before. This is the first time that's happened.
Because it was the first time he's ever tried to stop a certification of the vote. You talked about Mr. Eastman right there. Mr. Eastman did say that he believed that rejecting the certification would lose 9-0. In the Supreme Court.
But that option was not the ultimate one that was asked. And all of those points, most importantly, were discussed among counsel in a meeting in terms of the opportunity for people to weigh in. These kinds of...
wait, hold on. I have to stop you there because that's actually not accurate. Mr. Trump excluded his White House counsel from the ultimate meeting with Mr. Eastman because he didn't want his White House counsel there because his White House counsel was telling him it was wrong.
But Vice President Pence had his lawyers there, and also you had Mr. Eastman there
and he said
to make that pitch.
And the bottom crazy.
But that's fine. That's what happens in constitutional debates. People disagree all the time about constitutional points, but nobody gets indicted. These are not criminal cases. This is how the electoral system works out. Nothing is more important and sacred than political speech.
And that will be sorted out.
And you have to have the ability, even in the White House, to discuss these various political and constitutional options.
And that will be adjudicated in the court. It's good to see that you're welcoming Mr. Pence as a witness. President Trump also said this week that he never told Mike Pence that he is, quote, too honest, as alleged in the indictment. Is the president prepared to say that under oath in a court of law?
The issue was described in Mr. Pence's book with respect to some of the litigation that was going on. And Mr. Pence said that he recalls Mr. Trump saying that Mr. Pence's position on a particular piece of litigation that was going on was hyper-technical and hyper-legal. That's a side issue. No one is going to be concerned about that. I cannot wait until I have the opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Pence, because what he will do is completely eliminate any doubt that Mr. Trump, President Trump, firmly believed that the election irregularities had led to inappropriate results. What was so frustrating for President Trump was that he thought that Vice President Pence was certifying an election that was not lawfully held. And he had every right to petition as Vice President to deal with that issue.
Well, I just want to go back to the issue of too honest. You're saying that he's saying that Mike Pence did not say that. What if Mike Pence has no?
I'll ask Mr. Pence the circumstances of that. But as described in Mr. Pence's book, it dealt with litigation that was ongoing.
I'm asking about as described in the indictment.
As described in the indictment?
Yes.
It's up to the government to prove that, and I'll be.
Well, and then I go back to my original.
But it appears to be contrary to what Mr. Pence was saying.
I go back to my original question.
Right.
Then. Will President Trump, under oath, take the stand and say that Mike Pence did not say that?
Let me say one thing. This is a criminal trial. It's up to the government to prove these things. The defense has no obligation to prove anything. We put the government to its test. The government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump had criminal intent. What Mr. Pence is saying in his book, and if he's consistent in his book, is that President Trump did not have criminal intent. He certainly disagreed with him as a constitutional matter, but he not once suggested, even till today, I've never heard him say that he thought that President Trump acted criminally. I think if I ask him on cross-examination, he's going to say it's shocking that the Biden administration brought this as a criminal
Well, we'll
case.
see what he says when he's under cross-examination. You still haven't answered my question about whether or not President Trump is going to take the stand.
That's impossible to say right now. What we have to see is what the Biden administration is going to put on evidence. If they put on Vice President Pence as a witness, I think the case will be dismissed after the government's case. It'll never come to a defense case because the government really has no evidence of criminal intent. What they have to show beyond a reasonable doubt is that President Trump did not believe that this election had irregularities and improprieties. They would have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, Smith is pretty clear in the indictment about the fact that President Trump lost the election. So you're arguing that Trump won or that he believed his lies about the election?
No, here's what people don't understand. This is a criminal case where they have to prove not whether or not he won, but whether or not he was acting corruptly, whether or not he was acting with a consciousness of guilt, with criminal intent. They'll never be able to prove that. That's the point. Whether or not Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden won, there's no question that there were irregularities and anomalies in the election. This election was held.
Every single court that looked at it said there weren't irregularities that overturned the election.
This election occurred in a pandemic. Not every court got to address the merits. As you know, most of the cases were dismissed prior to the merits. Now, this is a criminal case. The burden of proof is on the government, not on the defense. One thing that Mike Pence and President Trump agree on, and there's no doubt about it, is that these issues needed to be debated on January 6th. Mr. Pence wanted them to be debated in Congress. He invited congressional leaders to make objections, to raise issues of fraud, to raise issues of irregularity. The only difference was that Mike Pence wanted it to be done on Capitol Hill. President Trump wanted it to be done in the state legislature.
The difference is that Mike Pence wanted to certify the election. He said he was right to certify the election. He said President Trump was wrong to pressure him.
In his book, he said he wanted an open debate.
It's not what he said. That's not what he said right now, and that's not what he did. He certified it. I did read his book. Let me ask you a final question. The prosecutors have also asked for a protective order governing the discovery materials. You're supposed to respond by 5 p.m. tomorrow to the judge. What's your response going to be?
This is an attack on you and members of the press. I'm really surprised people haven't spoken out about it. What the Biden administration is trying to do is prevent the press from learning about exculpatory and helpful information, evidence that the people have a right to know about. What the position of the prosecutor is non-sensitive, ordinary evidence should not be disclosed to the press. That's shocking. Not only do they want to violate President Trump's First Amendment rights, they want to violate freedom of the press. And I'm surprised that the major networks aren't filing papers along with me on Monday.
We will see what the judge has to say.
I can get your lawyer.